My name is Bill Long. I was born in Hazel Valley, Arkansas, September the 13th, 1935. My dad worked as a laborer. We were all poor people. They had trouble keeping us kids fed, I would think, but they did. I went to school the first time in Hazel Valley, Arkansas. Then they closed it, and I went to Durham, Arkansas. Then they closed that, and I ended up in Elkins school, in Elkins, Arkansas.
So tell me, what was it like going to school in Elkins? What was that like?
I kind of feel like they taught me a few things. I didn't even finish high school. I finished my education after I got in the military.
So tell me about your military service. Where did you serve and what did you do?
I volunteered for the United States Navy, and they sent me to San Diego, California for basic military. Then from there they transferred me to Norfolk, Virginia, and I ended up aboard the aircraft carrier U.S. Midway.
And so where all did you serve?
I served in the military. They dispatched us from Norfolk, Virginia to Korea. At that time we had the A-bomb aboard. That's when MacArthur was in charge. But we went there, we operated out of that area for a while. Then the ship we took, we'd had damage on it, and we took it to Birmingham, Washington, and they put it in the dry dock for repair. Well, at that time, I got transferred off back to San Diego, California, was placed on a repair ship. My military service, I was in a lot of different countries. I got an education to be a poor boy from Arkansas. They taught me a little about the world.
So tell about how'd you end up in law enforcement?
I did that while I was in the military. I was, I'd worked in law enforcement in our ships there. Then, but how I got involved, even when I was a kid, the city police in Fayetteville, I worked there in a restaurant, and I knew most of them, and I got interested in it, of what they were doing, and they were helping people and taking care of the problems, and it was something that I liked doing. Then I went, after I got out of the service, I went to St. Louis, Missouri, and I went to work at McDonnell Aircraft and I was parts expediter for the Mercury project. We were building the spaceship, and it was all secret thing at that time, but I was working inside, which I didn't like, so I got involved in law enforcement up there. And when I got ready to leave St. Louis, I come back to Fayetteville, and a guy by the name of Pearl Watts was chief of police at the Fayetteville PD, and he hired me. And I come back, and I spent the rest of my life in that field.
So talk about how you went from working for Pearl to ended up sheriff, and kind of just walk me through it.
Well, when I worked at the PD, I was interested in advancing. I wanted to better myself. And I'd had volunteer organizations. I created an auxiliary police department. That was under the Civil Defense Program. We could get money and to be able to help us set those programs up, and we needed people to help us work traffic, especially at the university at that time with their ball games and all that. So I got into that, and the more that I did, the more I liked it. So at that time, they had problems in the sheriff's office, and I'd been looking at it. And after I left the PD, I went to work for a county judge named Gene Thrasher. He was my next door neighbor in Fayetteville. Well, I set these programs up with under him out of the county judge's office. Then I decided I was going to run for sheriff, and at that time, I ran and was fortunately elected.
Tell me about your first race. Who'd you run against, and what was it like?
A guy that was in there named Arthur Davidson, I believe was his name. He had been there for a while, but they had had some problems, and in the race, the people elected me over him. It was different at that time. The sheriff's department, they weren't uniform. I mean, they wore different type clothes. The units, had markers that they put on the side to identify the car, but they had no light bars or anything like that. They wasn't, to me, more of a professional looking vehicle, because I wanted everybody to know who they were, and that appearance of that vehicle indicated that. So I set out to do that as soon as I was elected, of which I did.
Tell more about that, how you were able to make the vehicles more professional and the equipment you set them up with.
Well, that was a continuous kind of an argument to get the funds to do it for the sheriff's office, but we did, and I remember back then most of the stuff we ended up getting from Farrier's Uniform Company out of Little Rock, Arkansas. Oh boy, the right name of Ralph York. He furnished the police uniforms. They sold them and the various thing in the police field. And that's where I ended up getting most of it. And it's like the picture on the wall there that I was showing you. That's where the old jail was. And at that time, I started trying to get my units marked up. And we had gotten an act passed to make the police light a blue light. At that time, they was yellow lights, red lights, any kind of lights that was running, and we wanted one distinctive thing to be law enforcement only. And we finally got that through the legislature down there, and I put those on the sheriff's unit when I got them marked up. They were the blue lights that the law has called for.
So tell me about your staff you had, and what was it like policing the county?
When I went in, everybody was doing everything. It was like, the deputy, he was a deputy, whatever. Well, on the organization, I set out trying to have where I could have officers that was patrol officers. Then I wanted officers that was doing criminal investigations, stuff in this order. Same way the matron. In the past, from what I gather, the matron generally that took care of the women prisoners was generally the sheriff's wife or, some family member that took care of that. Well, I wanted another officer that their primary duty to take care of that. And I put a girl to work. I worked with her daddy at the Fayetteville PD. Her daddy's name was Dick Muller. He was an old city officer. And Rosemary Muller was his daughter. And I'd worked with them and all that. So I put Rosemary in as a uniform matron for Washington County Sheriff's Office. She spent her time there when I left, she ended up with the Fayetteville PD, and she retired from there. I've not had contact with Rosemary in some time. I don't know what that situation is now.
Tell me about your sheriff's posse. How did it get started and how long did it continue?
The sheriff's posse, when I took office, they had it was a volunteer thing that they did at the Springdale Rodeo Ground. And they was different people that was help them with the rodeo. Well, when I took office, some of the members I knew, we had talked, and I set up and made it the sheriff's posse and did the paperwork to make it the Washington County Sheriff's Posse. And I got the people that was volunteering, that was working for us in traffic, whatever we needed. They were volunteer officers, and I used them all the time. They worked with me all the time I was in office. I used them in extra patrol deputies. If we had problems in a little town out in the rural area, I had members of my posse that was deputies for me that worked it. And they did this for all the time I was in there and saved the county all this money. You know, they weren't getting paid a salary per se. But those officers was there all the time I was in the sheriff's office. The posse was there when I left.
Do you know how long it continued after?
It continued. I think Marshall came in. Those of us that kind of helped him at the time to get in the elected sheriff, he kept it. Bud Dennis, I believe, was the one that came in after him. Well, Bud had kept it. Kenneth McKee came in. He was sheriff. And at that time, they needed to make some changes in the posse operation. There's different people. I had an old boy by the name of Guy Terry that was the manager of it. He was the captain, or whatever you wanted to call him. But they changed it during the term of Kenneth. And Kenneth and I had talked about it. I worked with Kenneth McKee back, for years in different capacities.
Talk about what your jail was like when you were there. Which jails did you use?
When I took office, the county jail was that picture there on the wall. Shows where we were welding, and it was the old building just south of the courthouse. And the jail was a 2-floor situation. We had cells upstairs, we had them downstairs, but it was kind of like a dungeon. They was all in one big room. We had some cells off the side of it, but it was needing a lot of repair, and it was a nightmare taking care of the prisoners there. So I started working to get the funds to build another jail. Well, it had been presented, or they had talked about getting it presented to the people to be voted on to build a new one. Well, at that time we did not have the funds, and with the help that I got through the federal program and the people out of the county judge's office, we worked together to build a jail in the old armory building right next to the courthouse, the old courthouse. So I built the jail in the basement of that old armory building. And I closed the old jail. It had been there since 1909. I took a lot of political heat for that, but where we build a new one, we'd build it hoping it would last at least 10 years, which it did. And it worked good. That was when I left office. That's where the sheriff's office was.
What were the challenges when you did leave office? What challenges were you facing and that your predecessor had to deal with?
Like in the sheriff's office, well, salary and number of deputies. I only had like 5 full-time deputies. The most I could pay them in salary was $500 a month. That was the top one that I had. The others, they made like $3 or $350, if I remember. And we were working to try to get the salary for the. And by the way, the sheriff's salary at that time was $5,000. And they also, there was some benefits that you're supposed to get. You know, they furnished the car, they furnished actually living quarters. The old jail is where the sheriffs in the past had lived, or they had that for their place to live. I didn't choose that. I had children, but anyway, our salary, that's what it was. So we were working to get that changed. And by the way, Marshall was the first one to benefit from all that work we were doing to get it increased. His salary, when he got in there, changed from that 5,000 to, I don't remember the exact amount, but it's something like 16, 17,000 a year. It went from that. But it took a lot of work to get all that done.
Well, tell me about Herb. He came to work for you and eventually ran. I think you were opposed by someone else.
Yes, I'd lost the Democrat primary. But no, Herb, I hired Herb when he got out of the service. You know, we've been friends. I went and talked to him, met him and his family and all that. He worked for me as an undercover officer. I didn't want anybody to know he was working at that time. But he worked that way for like 6 months, I believe it was. Then I moved him into uniform and put him on the road. But I've known Herb for a while.
What else can you tell me about it?
About Herb?
Yeah.
Well, he wanted to run for sheriff at that time, and he ran on the Republican ticket because this was I was a Democrat. I was elected a Democrat, but my posse, most of the members, supported Herb. We went in there and talked about it because I was leaving at the end of that term. So they supported Herb to get him elected sheriff and helped him. And I think, I can't remember if Herb was in there, I think 2 terms is what he was in there. But, and I still see him, but he got in there, and then of course he had problems. You know, that, in the sheriff's office, there's problems.
Well, some of the problems that the previous sheriffs,
Yeah.
Helder, Marshall, others have said they faced were struggles to meet pay that the other departments had, and space in the jail. So, how do you see the problems of your day are similar to now? Are they?
Well, it had always been that way. So the jail that I closed down there, it was like I had to keep all the prisoners and, you know, maintaining and taking care of it. Then the new one, that I built, it done so much better, but we were underpaid, understaffed. I couldn't hire the people that I really needed to take care of those problems. And it's been that way up until now. I go down to the sheriff's office and see what's there today. I 'Cause I wonder, it wasn't, we didn't have it that way in our day. We couldn't get people to work. It was hard to have the salary to pay them. It's like I told you, $500 was my chief deputy's salary a month, and that we didn't work no 8 hours a day. If we were working on a case, we started it. If it was 12 hours or 15 hours, we were still working on it, and there wasn't no extra money to pay for that extra time.
Who was the prosecutors that you remember working with over the years?
Malin Gibson. Malin went in as prosecutor at the same time I went in as sheriff of Washington County. And Malin and I have known one another for a lot of years. He was prosecutor all the time I was sheriff. Then he went on and he was elected circuit judge of the 4th Judicial District, which is down there. He replaced Maupin Cummings as circuit judge.
If you had to describe or tell somebody about Malin, what would you tell them?
He's a good shot. You got to be careful if you're going bird hunting or pheasant hunting with him. He still can do it, and he loves to fish. And all in all, he's really a good guy. He concentrated on the job, and and we were friends, like I said, all those years. A lot of times we might not agree on something, but he worked at it.
Who are some of the local attorneys that you were familiar with, maybe that were involved with cases and stuff?
Oh my goodness, there were so many of them. Of course, Bill Putman, one that comes to my mind first. I'd had some issues there, but Putman, all the old attorneys that had been there for years, I worked with all of them.
What about judges at the time? Was Judge Butt in there at the time?
Judge, yeah, Thomas Butt. You know, the first judge I dealt with was with the city, and that was Vicious Jim Patak. Jim Patak, he was a municipal judge for Fayetteville for a lot of years. Then from him, when we went on, then Tom Butts was a chancery judge, and of course Maupin Cummings, the circuit judge. Then John Lineberger, who became a judge later, John was first appointed public defender down there. That was down that I'd worked with him for years. Well, John went on and he was judge, and I think John's still here now. I think he lives out off of Beaver Lake.
If you had to explain to somebody what your department was like back in the day, how would you describe it?
Oh my, we had gotten so many more people, and it was a tough situation to be able to do the job like I felt like it needed to be done. And I was of the opinion that that office, if somebody called the sheriff's office, I don't care what it's about, if they feel like they need to talk to somebody, then it becomes the sheriff's responsibility to get his deputies or himself go visit with them. It don't matter about what. I get upset today because I don't see that happening very much. They call the public, you'll get calls where you can't do anything maybe, but the people that's concerned about it enough to call you, I feel like you need to visit with them and explain and try to be of help to them.
Who are the county judges you dealt with as sheriff?
Well, The first one was Bruce Crider. It wasn't his gone by the time I went in office. Bruce Crider was sheriff of Washington County before that. But the county judges that I dealt with was like Gene Thrasher. He was the one that I worked with. Then later, Val Lester. Val Lester had came in. Those are the two primary ones that I worked with while I was in office.
Who were some of the other county officials that you might remember?
Well, Marilyn Edwards worked in the county clerk's office. Ruth Roberts was the county clerk at that time. The county officers, we tried to work together, closely together, regardless of what department that was there.
What's something that people probably wouldn't know about the sheriff department back in the day? What's something maybe?
Well, the sheriff's department back in my day, like one of the issues that I had that really bothered me, as much as I could do about it, but mental health cases where we were involved, where we had to be the ones that, if something like that happened, we didn't have facilities to take care of a person that was mentally ill, and we had a lot of older people, some that wasn't, that was actually needed to be hospitalized. And at that time, the only thing we could do is fix a cell, and I did this in this jail I built. We got an old padded cell where they couldn't hurt themselves till I could get them transported to Little Rock, the state hospital. But that was a real issue. It's things that we had to deal with as sheriff, like the violation of the laws and property issues and stuff like that. But that went with the job.
What were most of the crimes you dealt with like?
Well, I was pretty proud of what we had accomplished, while I was in there, because I'd had some homicides. We solved those. I worked the one that people still remember, especially the old timers in Tawny Town, was the Safeway store in Springdale, and it was robbed. This guy that robbed it was Daniel Lon Graham was his name. And I had arrested him back before on another issue up in Washington County. It happened in Madison County. But anyway, he escaped while he was serving a prison sentence and came here, obtained a weapon, and robbed the store. And these boys that was in there, he took them out in the country, laid them down, had them lay down, shot each one of them in the back of the head. We cleared that case. I've got information here I can give you about that. I had one case that I never did totally get clear. This is my satisfaction. We had found the body over west of Lincoln, close to the Oklahoma line, like 9:30 one morning. This guy had been shot but twice. In the head, he had no identification on him. And in our investigation, the guy was from California. We never did get that one really solved. The FBI had a big file on him and all this other stuff. But I never did get that one cleared to my satisfaction.
What are some other cases that stand out in your mind over the years that were big ones that you dealt with?
Well, I told you about this Daniel Lon Graham case, the guy that with the kids, and I'd had a guy kill his granddad. Some of the other people are still there. He's in Springdale. Gosh, the others, we had a lot of, in the drug cases at that time, that's when drugs is starting to get, people getting more at least it become more known that they were using drugs and stuff like this, and especially with the university being there, I was real concerned with that. The first drug raids I made was in '69, where I arrested 15 of them at one time, and that kind of an issue. But
what do you mean it was kind of an issue?
well, at that time, with that many people arresting them at one time, you know, the news media made a big thing out of it. So the problem was with our student bodies over there, you know, we were concerned with all that, and we were trying to slow it up and let them know we had to take some of the students to Little Rock that was involved with various type of drugs, and it was an issue at that time. That was in '69. Then with the colored issue, you know, we had students at the university that had the problems in Little Rock and all that. That was something else that I was real concerned about, being the chief law enforcement officer of the county. We didn't want things like that happening there, you know, and it was issues that we tried to take care of.
So how come there's I know there's more people, but such a higher number of people, percentage-wise, are in jail now, 50 years later, compared to back then? Why are so many more people in jail now? Do you know?
Well, I don't think they necessarily are, other than there's just more people, and there's more strangers, if you will. Most time, and back when I took office and when I was in the sheriff's office, I kept up with if people were moving in and we were getting new citizens in the area, then I wanted to know who they were, where they're from, you know, just as people. And today, my Lord, we've got so many people that's come in, and they have a terrible time trying to identify and to know the ones that maybe is problems or not problems. As far as the jails, there's more people because there's more violation. I spent the last few years I worked working for parole and probation services. It was my theory that if you got somebody in trouble, instead of putting them in jail, put them on parole, make them serve their sentence in the field. That way they could work and, you know, improve themselves. And I worked the last 10 years I worked in that field. And I still believe that's the answer to the crowded jails, but they got to have officers that's going to see that they're serving a sentence, not just to get the money and let them come and go, and you have to check on them. You've got to spend time on every case you got. That's, I think, a big need in that field.
What else can you say, if you had to give some reflections about your time in office? What did you learn while you were in office? Or what do you remember?
Well, my goodness, I've seen so many changes and things that's happened. Then I think of the problems that we had trying to get enough people to where we could follow up on a case, get it solved, get their people's possessions back to them, all these things. As far as what I learned, I guess just working with people that's got problems. I see that, and I'm not so sure I got all the answers for it, but I saw a lot of it. All right.
If somebody who'd never been to Washington County was talking to you and they said, "Bill, tell me about Washington County where you served as sheriff. What's that county like?" What would you tell them?
I'd tell them that Washington County is the best county in the state. We've got a little bit of everything down there. The people, it's like even Fayetteville, with the university located there, we've had various issues, different people's opinions. And the city has to deal with all that to take care of everybody. And they still do. I'm proud of the county, the city. They don't just help certain ones. They're involved in all phases. And they've been able to do that ever since I was a kid and was raised up. I worked in the city of Fayetteville, walked Dixon Street as a beat. Worked there. My first job was washing dishes in a cafe. I think I was all of 14, but I'm still proud of that county. Now, we all have issues. Washington County's got a lot of rural areas still yet. I hear from some of them occasionally still yet. And this Hazel Valley, where I'm from, that's about out nowhere. I don't know if you're familiar where it's at, but I still hear from people occasionally. But I'd much rather be living in Washington County right now.
What about Sheriff Helder? If I ask you what kind of a job has he done, what would you say?
Well, Heller, he worked for the PD for a while. I know. Some of the other things you had said about, but at least Heller's been there now for a pretty good while. He's got a lot of people that work for him, and he's got more responsibility. I don't try to keep up with what he's doing or how he's doing. I kind of feel like the sheriff's office sometimes needs to be changed. And I think that's no different today than it was back in my day. You need people to have different views or different ideas. There's only certain things they can accomplish. And when you get there, I think it's time to do something.
If I ask you to finish this sentence, how would you do it? My favorite thing about Washington County is...
I'm sorry.
My favorite thing about Washington County is what?
Well, as the county, it's like I was stating there a little while ago, I think the world of Washington County and the people, and I don't think we've got a better county in the state. And I've been in every one of them in the state. I worked for Pryor, I worked for Clinton, I worked with Dale Bumpers. I mean, I've been in all the different factors, but Washington County, not only because that's my home, but I feel like they do a better job than. I'm a conservative Democrat. I'm beginning to wonder if there is such a thing anymore, but I go back. I worked even Orville Faubus, all the wild stories they told about Orville and all that, but I've been involved with the Democrat Party in this state all my life. The philosophy and my way of thinking, Democrats want to help people. Now, how they do it, sometimes there's problems. Well, but that's what makes me a Democrat. But I'm a conservative Democrat. I think that's just the way I live.